The Cold War period lasted from 1947 to the early 1990s. The National Aeronautics and Space Administration of the United States was furiously working to surpass the Soviet Union in the space race. NASA launched the Friendship 7 mission in early 1962 and eventually reached success in allowing the first man to orbit the Earth, John Glenn. Additionally, overlapping the early years of the Cold War period was segregation that had been present for decades. Influenced by the time, a slew of black women were lost in Friendship 7's success. These women were the real brains behind the mission. In this time of segregation and sexism, the majority of white male workers of NASA were extremely prejudiced towards these women, earning the women little short-term credit for their achievements. But before a computer became an inanimate object, and before Mission Control landed in Houston, before Sputnik changed the course of history, and before the NACA became NASA, before the Supreme Court case Brown v. Board of Education of Topeka established that separate was not in fact equal, and before the poetry of Martin Luther King Jr.'s I Have a Dream speech rang out over the steps of the Lincoln Memorial, Langley's West Computers were helping America dominate aeronautics, space research, and computer technology, carving out a place for themselves as female mathematicians who were also black mathematicians who were also female. In the beginning of black women's time working in NACA, they were not treated or recognized for their efforts. During these times, it was far more convenient for men in engineering jobs to hire women to do the math for them. Oftentimes, these women were young and had college degrees, but were expected to pursue pink-collar jobs instead of higher-up careers like white men. Although black women in NACA were not recognized as intellectuals by their white male counterparts, these women set a precedent for racial and gender acceptance in a highly prestigious scientific workplace.
Katherine Johnson was one of 3 black students to attend an all-white West Virginia graduate school, speaking to her intelligence and diligence. She began working at NACA in the West Area Computing Section in 1952 as what people called a human computer. Johnson was ultimately a huge contributor to the Friendship 7's success through complex calculations and research. She was the first woman to receive credit as the author of a research report.
Dorothy Vaughan began her professional career as a math teacher at Robert Russa Morton High School in Farmville, Virginia. She later left this job to take what she had presumed to be a temporary war job with NACA in the Langley Memorial Aeronautical Laboratory in 1943. She worked in a segregated unit called the West Area Computing, which had been entirely made up of female computers. In this position, Vaughan excelled and later became NACA's first black supervisor. She remained supervisor until NACA became NASA and all segregated facilities were abolished. She then received an important position as a programmer, where she was admired by both her black and white, male and female counterparts.
Mary Jackson worked as a math teacher in Calvert County, Maryland, before beginning to work at NASA in the West Area Computing Unit. However, after receiving an offer from a specialized engineer to work in a new division, Jackson received permission to allow her to take classes at the nearby Hampton High School, which was segregated. In 1958, Jackson became NASA's first black female engineer.
The black women working for NACA were caught in the midst of a turning point of racism and inequality across the country. The civil rights movement was a successful historical movement and improved the conditions under which black people lived. President John F. Kennedy addressed these conditions in a speech delivered on June 11, 1963, in which he called Congress to enact legislation giving all Americans the right to be served in public facilities, as well as a greater protection for the right to vote. During this time, it was made illegal for public places and businesses to segregate people based on the color of their skin. Although these reforms were very progressive, private businesses had the power to choose who had access to their services.
However, for those living through this time of change, life was very difficult. In 1958, the company that had previously been referred to as NACA became NASA, the National Aeronautics and Space Administration. After this change of organization, several new reforms came about, such as the abolishment of the West Computing Office. Many people were generally angry about the new rights granted to black Americans during this time and reacted to it with racism and violence. Change regarding the new American ideals about equality happened slowly over a long period of time. In many places, segregation of privately owned businesses remained in effect until 1964 when the Civil Rights Act was passed. Up until this point, and well after it, people had been judged based on the color of their skin and were treated differently because of it. For example, there was not a colored woman's bathroom in the building where Katherine Johnson worked. so she had to walk a half an hour from her office anytime she had to use it.
There's no bathroom for me here.
What do you mean there's no bathroom for you here?
There is no bathroom. There are no colored bathrooms in this building, or any building outside the West Campus, which is half a mile away. Did you know that?
However, the fact that Katherine Johnson, an extraordinarily intelligent young black woman, was promoted during Friendship 7's mission demonstrates some sort of racial sexual acceptance of a human who was different than the majority of her co-workers. Similarly, Mary Jackson did have to jump through hoops and face racism directly, but eventually she was able to become an admired engineer. Both women served as inspiration for other women wishing to achieve more high-status jobs at NASA.
NASA's creation of the STEM department for women demonstrates the value they finally were recognized to serve and how influential their work was. All of the black women at NASA were kept as human computers working separately in a segregated facility called the West Computing Office, being officially controlled by a supervisor who is a white woman, but internally led by Dorothy Vaughan. Vaughan and several other black women joined the newly formed Analysis and Computation Division, a more advanced form of STEM technology that integrated people of all races and sexes. This division also made it possible for the formation of youth organizations and increased efforts to educate them on STEM.
Uncovering and telling these stories will hopefully lead to deeper scholarly examinations that will enrich our understanding of what women of all backgrounds meant to NASA and what NASA continues to mean to young women interested in careers in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. In 2015, Katherine Johnson finally received the credit she deserved. Barack Obama awarded her with the Presidential Medal of Freedom, an emblem of popularity that helped craft the book Hidden Figures into a major motion picture, where many other significant black women were recognized, such as Dorothy Vaughan and Mary Jackson. The content of the movie and book Hidden Figures was a shock to many Americans. The fact that these women were so significant within NASA, but had been forgotten and ignored throughout the years. Because these influential women were really hidden in history, it is truly a compromise in a time of conflict that the women were able to make such a huge impact on basic human rights and inspire change even today.
I fly the machine.
And right now, it seems like this machine's flying me.
We're on the same page, John. Our guys are on it.
Let's get the girl to check the numbers.
The girl?
Yes, sir.
You mean Catherine?
Yes, sir. The smart one. I mean, she says they're good. I'm ready to go.
All right, we'll get into it.
Roger.